Hello, happy holidays, and welcome to Literature Out Loud's program called A Very Varied Christmas. We have three very nice little stories for you tonight. We are incorporating the words of Grace Paley, who was a political activist. Let's see, she was born in 1922 but didn't die till 2007, nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, wonderful writer. Her words will be brought to life to you by Beth Malone, and you can't beat that. We also have Truman Capote, which I know you have heard of, and he was from 1924 to 1984, wrote all these things like In Cold Blood and a lot of other stuff, and his words will be brought to you by Mike Monroney. I'll be doing an excerpt, which I don't usually do, but we're running short on time, from A Child's Christmas in Wales by the wonderful Dylan Thomas, who wrote from and died in 1953, born in 1914, and was a Welshman. Wonderful people, wonderful readers, a wonderful program, and I'm so glad you're here. So I am hoping to let you know that Mikey and Beth both have things to do. Beth, what have you got coming up?
I am in the Theater Aspen virtual benefit. Is it a benefit? Or no, it's just a concert. I don't think it's a benefit, is it? It's free, so it can't really be a benefit. I'm bringing into my computer for your pleasure on December 23rd and then again on December 27th. Theater Aspen virtual concert. That's what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, I bet you can look at the Theater Aspen website and find out more about how to find it. What do you think?
Yes, sorry, I'm not more helpful.
Okay. And Mikey's been traveling all over the place and is, as usual, keeping Theater Aspen running. So we're glad for that.
Well, I've actually taken a step back from my job at the Aspen Historical Society. So I did get a chance to travel for quite a bit in October, November. But I'm back now for a while, and we've got tour starting up at the Historical Society, a downtown tour and hotel Jerome tour. And next week, believe it or not, we're actually going to be caroling at the Hotel Jerome Monday.
With masks on. I love.
We're going to be on the balcony and nobody else will be there.
You're just breathing on each other.
Yeah, we're breathing down on the masses.
Well, one would, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
So in the event that Beth finds a place to perch, we're going to start out with her reading The Loudest Voice by Grace Paley. I hope y'all enjoy it. I certainly do. Thank you, Bethy. Take it away.
Grace Paley, The Loudest Voice. There is a certain place where dumb waiters boom, doors slam, dishes crash. Every window is a mother's mouth, bidding the street, shut up, go skate somewhere else, come home. My voice is the loudest. There, my own mother is still as full of breathing as me. And the grocer stands up to speak to her. Miss Abramovitz, he says, people should not be afraid of their children. Ah, Mr. Balick, my mother replies, if you say to her or her father, shush, they say, in the grave it will be quiet. From Coney Island to the cemetery, says my papa, it's the same subway, it's the same fare. I am right next to the pickle barrel. My pinky is making tiny whirlpools in the brine. I stop a moment and denounce Campbell's tomato soup, Campbell's vegetable beef soup, Campbell's Scotch broth. Be quiet, the grocer says. The labels are coming off. Please, Shirley, be a little quiet, my mother begs me. In that place, the whole street groans, be quiet, but steals from the happy chorus of my inside self not a tittle or a jot. There too, but just around the corner, is a red brick building that has been old for many years. Every morning the children stand before it in double lines, which must be straight. They are not insulted, they are waiting anyway. I am usually among them. I am, in fact, the first, since I begin with A. One cold morning, the monitor tapped me on the shoulder. Go to room 409, Shirley Abramovitz, he said. I did as I was told. I went in a hurry up a down staircase to room 409, which contained 6th graders. I had to wait at a desk without wiggling until Mr. Hilton, their teacher, had time to speak. After 5 minutes, he said, "Shirley?" "What?" I whispered. He said, My, Shirley Abramovitz, they told me you had a particularly loud, clear voice and read with lots of expression. Could that be true?" "Oh, yes," I whispered. "In that case, don't be silly. I might very well be your teacher someday. Speak up, speak up." "Yes," I shouted. "More like it," he said. "Now, Shirley, can you put a ribbon in your hair or a bobby pin? It's too messy." "Yes," I bawled. Now, calm down." He turned to the class. "Children, not a sound. Open at page 39, read till 52. When you finish, start again." He looked me over once more. "Now, Shirley, you know, I suppose, that Christmas is coming. We are preparing a beautiful play. Most of the parts have been given out, but I still need a child with a strong voice, lots of stamina. Do you know what stamina is? You do? Smart kid. No, I heard you read 'The Lord is my shepherd' in assembly yesterday. I was very impressed. Wonderful delivery. Mrs. Jordan, your teacher, speaks highly of you. Now you listen to me, Shirley Abramovitz. If you want to take the part and be in the play, repeat after me. I swear to work harder than I ever did before." I looked to heaven and said at once, "Oh, I swear." I kissed my pinky and looked at God. "That is an actor's life, my dear," he explained. "Like a soldier's, never tardy or disobedient to his general, the director. Everything," he said, "absolutely everything will depend on you." That afternoon, all over the building, children scraped and scrubbed the turkeys and the sheaves of corn off the schoolroom windows. Goodbye Thanksgiving. The next morning, a monitor brought red paper and green paper from the office. We made new shapes and hung them on the walls and glued them to the doors. The teachers became happier and happier. Their heads were ringing like the bells of childhood. My best friend Evie was prone to evil, but she did not get a single demerit for whispering. We learned Holy Night without an error. How wonderful, said Miss Glacé, the student teacher, to think that some of you don't even speak the language. We learned Deck the Halls and Hark the Herald Angels. They weren't ashamed and we weren't embarrassed. Oh, but when my mother heard all about it, she said to my father, "Misha, you don't know what's going on there. Kramer is the head of the tickets committee." "Who?" asked my father. "Kramer? Oh, yes, an active woman." "Active? Active has to have a reason. Listen," she said sadly. "I'm surprised to see my neighbors making tra-la-la for Christmas." My father couldn't think of what to say to that. Then he decided, "You're in America, Clara. You wanted to come here. In Palestine, the Arabs would be eating you alive. Europe, you have pogroms. Argentina is full of Indians. Here, you got Christmas. Some joke, huh?" "Very funny, Misha. What is becoming of you? If we came to a new country a long time ago to run away from tyrants, and instead we fall into a creeping pogrom that our children learn a lot of lies, so what is the joke? Ah, Misha, your idealism is going away." "So is your sense of humor." "That I never had, but idealism, you had a lot of." "I'm the same Misha Abramovitz. I didn't change an iota. Ask anyone. Only ask me," says my mama. May she rest in peace. I got the answer. Meanwhile, the neighbors had to think of what to say too. Marty's father said, "You know, he has a very important part, my boy." "Yeah, mine also," said Mr. Sauerfeld. "Not my boy," says Mrs. Klieg. "I told him no. The answer is no. When I say no, I mean no." The rabbi's wife said, "It's disgusting." But no one listened to her. Under the narrow sky of God's wisdom, she wore a strawberry blonde wig. Every day was noisy and full of experience. "I was right-hand man," Mr. Hilton said. "How could I get along without you, Shirley?" He said, "Your mother and father ought to get down on their knees every night and thank God for giving them a child like you." He also said, "You're absolutely a pleasure to work with, my dear, dear child." Sometimes he said, "For God's sakes, what did I do with the script? Shirley, find it." Then I answered quietly, "Here it is, Mr. Hilton." Once in a while, when he was very, very tired, he would cry out, Shirley, I'm just tired of screaming at those kids. Will you tell Ira Pushkov not to come in until Lester points to that star the second time? Then I roared, Ira Pushkov, what is the matter with you? Oh, Mr. Hilton told you 5 times already, don't come in till Lester points to that star the second time. Ah, Clara, my father asked, what does she do there till 6 o'clock? She can't even put plates on the table. Christmas, my mother said coldly. Ho, ho, my father said. Christmas. What's the harm? After all, Christmas teaches everyone history. We learn from reading this is a holiday from pagan times, also candles, lights, even Hanukkah. So we learn it's not altogether Christian. So if they think it's a private holiday, they are not only ignorant, they are not patriotic. What belongs to history belongs to all men. You want to go back to the Middle Ages? Is it better you shave your head with a second-hand razor? Does it hurt Shirley to learn to speak up? It does not. So maybe someday she won't live between the kitchen and the shop. She's not a fool. I thank you, Papa, for your kindness. It is true about me to this day. I am foolish, but I am not a fool. That night, my father kissed me and said with great interest in my career, Shirley, tomorrow's your big day. Congrats. Save it, my mother said. Then she shut all the windows in order to prevent tonsillitis. In the morning, it snowed. On the street corner, a tree had been decorated for us by a kind city administration. In order to miss its chilly shadow, our neighbors walked 3 blocks east to buy a loaf of bread. The butcher pulled down black window shades to keep the colored lights from shining on his chickens. Oh, not me. On the way to school, with both my hands, I tossed it a kiss of tolerance. Poor thing. It was a stranger in Egypt. I walked straight into the auditorium, past the staring children. Go ahead, Shirley, said the monitors. 4 boys, big for their age, had already started working as propmen and stagehands. Mr. Hilton was very nervous. He was not even happy. Whatever he started to say ended in a sideward look of sadness. He sat slumped in the middle of the first row and asked me to help Miss Glacé. I did this, although she thought my voice was too resonant and said, show off. Parents began to arrive long before we were ready. They wanted to make a good impression. From among the yards of drapes, I peeked out at the audience. I saw my embarrassed mother. Ira, Lester, and Meyer were pasted to their beards by Miss Glacé. She almost forgot to thread the star on its wire, but I reminded her. I coughed a few times to clear my throat. Miss Glacé looked around and saw that everyone was in costume and online, waiting to play his part. She whispered, all right then. Jackie Sauerfeld, the prettiest boy in first grade, parted the curtains with his skinny elbow and in a high voice sang out, Parents dear, we are here to make a Christmas play in time. If we give in narrative and illustrate with pantomime. He disappeared. My voice burst immediately from the wings to the great shock of Ira, Lester, and Meyer, who were waiting for it, but were surprised all the same. I remember the house where I was born. Miss Glacé yanked the curtain open, and there it was, the house. An old hayloft where Celia Cornblaw lay in the straw with Cindy Lou, her favorite doll. Ira, Lester, and Meyer moved slowly from the wings toward her, sometimes pointing to a moving star, sometimes ahead to Cindy Lou. It was a long story, and it was a sad story. I carefully pronounced all the words about my lonesome childhood, while little Eddie Brownstein wandered upstage and down with his shepherd's stick looking for sheep. I brought up lonesomeness again, and not being understood at all, except by some women everybody hated. Eddie was too small for that, and Marty Groff took his place wearing his father's prayer shawl. I announced 12 friends, and half the boys in 4th grade gathered around Marty, who stood on an orange crate. My voice harangued. Sorrowful and loud, I declaimed about love and God and man, but because of the terrible deceit of A.B. Stock, we came suddenly to a famous moment. Marty, whose remembering tongue I was, waited at the foot of the cross. He stared desperately at the audience. I groaned, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? The soldiers, who were sheiks, grabbed poor Marty to pin him up to die, but he wrenched free, turned again to the audience, spread his arms aloft to show despair and the end. I murmured at the top of my voice, "The rest is silence." But as everyone in this room, in this city, in this world now knows, I shall have life eternal. That night, Mrs. Cornblow visited our kitchen for a glass of tea. "How's the virgin?" asked my father with a look of concern. "For a man with a daughter, you got a fresh mouth, Abramovitz." "Here," said my father kindly, "have some lemon. It'll sweeten your disposition." They debated a little in Yiddish, then fell in a puddle of Russian and Polish. What I understood next was my father, who said, "Still in all, it was certainly a beautiful affair, you have to admit, introducing us to the beliefs of a different culture." "Well, yes," said Mrs. Cornblow. "The only thing, you know Charlie Turner, that cute boy in Celia's class, a couple others, they got very small parts or no parts at all. In very bad taste, it seemed to me. After all, it's their religion." "Ah," my mother explained. "What could Mr. Hilton do? They got very small voices. After all, why should they holler? The English language they know from the beginning by heart. They're blonde like angels. You think it's so important they should get in a play? Christmas, the whole piece of goods, they own it." I listened and listened until I couldn't listen anymore, too sleepy. I climbed out of bed and kneeled and made a little church out of my hands and said, "Hear, O Israel." Then I called out in Yiddish, "Please, good night, good night." "Shh," my father said, "shut yourself," and slammed the kitchen door. I was happy. I fell asleep at once. I had prayed for everybody, my talking family, cousins far away, passers-by, and all the lonesome Christians. I expected to be heard. My voice was certainly the loudest. The next story you're going to hear is being read by Mike Monroney, and it is by Truman Capote.
Thanks, Beth. Great story. This is One Christmas by Truman Capote. First, a brief autobiographical prologue. My mother, who was exceptionally intelligent and was the most beautiful girl in Alabama, everyone said so, it was true. And when she was 16, she married a 28-year-old businessman who came from good old New Orleans and a big family. The marriage lasted a year. My mother was too young to be a mother or a wife. She was also too ambitious. She wanted to go to college and to have a career. So she left her husband, and as for what to do with me, she deposited me in the care of her large Alabama family. Over the years, I seldom saw either of my parents. My father was occupied in New Orleans, and my mother, after graduating from college, was making a success for herself in New York City. So far as I was concerned, and this was not an unpleasant situation, I was happy where I was. I had many kindly relatives, aunts and uncles and cousins, particularly one cousin, an elderly, white-haired, slightly crippled woman named Sook, Miss Sook Falk. I had other friends, but she was by far my best friend. It was Sook who told me about Santa Claus, his flowing beard, his red suit, his jangling present-filled sled, and I believed her, just as I believed that everything was God's will or the Lord's, as Sook always said. If I stubbed my toe or fell off a horse or caught a good-sized fish at the creek, well, good or bad, it was all the Lord's will. And that was what Sook said when she received the frightening news from New Orleans. My father wanted me to travel there to spend Christmas with him. I cried. I didn't want to go. I'd never left this small, isolated Alabama town surrounded by forests and farms and rivers. I'd never gone to sleep without Sook combing her fingers through my hair and kissing me goodnight. Then, too, I was afraid of strangers, and my father was a stranger. I'd seen him several times, but the memory was hazy. I had no idea what he was like. But Sook said, "It's the Lord's will, and who knows, buddy, maybe you'll see snow." Snow. Until I could read myself, Sook read me many stories, and it seemed a lot of snow was in almost all of them, drifting, dazzling fairy tale flakes. It was something I dreamed about, something magical and mysterious that I wanted to see and feel and touch. Of course, I never had. Neither had Sook, for that matter. I don't know why she thought I would see snow in New Orleans, for New Orleans is even hotter. So, never mind. She was just trying to give me the courage and give me some enthusiasm for the trip. It was a 400-mile trip, something like that. My first stop was in Mobile. I changed buses there and rode along forever and forever through swampy lands and along sea coasts until we arrived in a loud city, tinkling with trolley cars and packed with dangerous, foreign-looking people. This was New Orleans. And suddenly, as I stepped off the bus, a man swept me into his arms, squeezed the breath out of me, and he was laughing. He was crying. A tall, good-looking man, laughing and crying. He said, "Don't you know me? Don't you know your daddy?" Well, I was speechless. I didn't say a word until at last, while we were riding along in a taxi, I asked, "Where is it?" "Our house. It's not far." "No, not the house. The snow." "What snow?" "I thought there'd be a lot of snow." He looked at me strangely, but he laughed. "There's never been any snow in New Orleans, not that I heard of. But listen, hear that thunder? It's going to rain." I don't know what scared me most, the thunder, the sizzling zigzags of lightning that followed it, or my father. That night when I went to bed, it was still raining. I said my prayers and prayed that I would soon be home with Sook. I didn't know how I could ever go to sleep without Sook to kiss me goodnight. And the fact was, I couldn't go to sleep. So I began to wonder what Santa Claus would bring me. I wanted a pearl-handled knife and a big set of jigsaw puzzles, a cowboy hat with a matching lasso, and a BB rifle to shoot sparrows. Years later, I actually did have a BB gun, and I shot a mockingbird and a bobwhite. I can never forget the regret that I felt, the grief. I never killed another thing, and the fish that I caught, I threw back in the river. And I wanted a box of crayons, and most of all, a radio, but I knew that was impossible. I didn't know 10 people who had radios. Remember, this was the Depression, and in the Deep South, houses furnished with radios and refrigerators were rare. My father had both. He seemed to have everything. A car with a rumble seat, not to mention an old, pink, pretty little house in the French Quarter, with iron-laced balconies and a secret patio garden colored with flowers and cooled by a fountain shaped like a mermaid. He also had a half dozen, I'd say a full dozen lady friends. Like my mother, my father had not remarried, but they'd both determined admirers and, willingly or not, eventually walked the path back to the altar. In fact, my father walked it 6 times. So you can see he must have had charm. And indeed, he seemed to charm most people, everybody except me. That was because he embarrassed me, always hauling me around to meet his friends, everybody from his banker to the barber who shaved him every day. Oh, and of course, his lady friends. And the worst part, all the time he was hugging and kissing me and bragging about me, I felt so ashamed. First of all, there was nothing to brag about. I knew I was just a little kid from Alabama, but I believed in Jesus and faithfully said my prayers. I knew Santa Claus existed. And at home in Alabama, except to go to church, I never wore shoes, winter or summer. It was pure torture being pulled along the streets of New Orleans in those tightly laced, hot as hell, heavy as lead shoes. I don't know what was worse, the shoes or the food. Back home, I was used to fried chicken and collard greens and butter beans and cornbread and other comforting things. But these New Orleans restaurants, I will never forget my first oyster. It was like a bad dream sliding down my throat. Decades passed before I could swallow another one. And as for all that spicy Creole cookery, just to think about it now gives me heartburn. No, sir, I hankered after biscuits right from the stove and milk fresh from the cows and homemade molasses fresh from the bucket. My poor father had no idea how miserable I was, partly because I never let him see it and certainly never told him, and partly because, despite my mother's protest, he'd managed to get legal custody of me for this Christmas holiday. He would say, "Tell the truth. Don't you want to come and live with me here in New Orleans?" "I can't." Well, what do you mean you can't? I miss Sook. I miss Queenie. We have a little rat terrier, a fun little thing, but we both love her. He said, don't you love me? I said, yeah. But the truth was, except for Sook and Queenie and a few cousins and a picture of my beautiful mother beside my bed, I had no real idea of what love meant. I soon found out. The day before Christmas, as we were walking along Canal Street, I stopped dead still, mesmerized by an object I saw in the window of a big toy store. It was green and had a red propeller. I was convinced that if you pedaled fast enough, it would take off and fly. Now, wouldn't that be amazing? I could just see my cousin standing on the ground while I flew around among the clouds. Talk about green. I laughed and laughed and laughed. It was the first thing I'd done that made my father look confident, even though I don't think he knew what I thought was so funny. That night, I prayed that Santa Claus would bring me the airplane. My father had already bought a Christmas tree and set it up, and we spent a great deal of time at the Five and Dime, picking out things to decorate it with. And then I made a mistake. I put a picture of my mother under the tree. The moment my father saw it, he went white and began to tremble. I didn't know what to do. But he did. He went to a cabinet and took out a tall glass and a bottle. I recognized that bottle because all my Alabama uncles had a plenty just like it. Prohibition moonshine. He filled the dark glass and drank it with hardly a pause. After that, it was though the picture had vanished. And so I awaited Christmas Eve and the always exciting advent of Fat Santa. Of course, I had never seen a weighted, jangling, belly-swollen giant flop down a chimney and gaily dispense his largesse under a Christmas tree. My cousin Billy Bob, who was a mean little runt but had a brain like a fist made out of iron, said it was a lot of hooey. There was no such creature. My foot, he said. Anybody would believe there was Santa Claus would believe a mule was a horse. This quarrel took place in a tiny courthouse square. I said, there is a Santa Claus because what he does is the Lord's will, and what is the Lord's will is the truth. And Billy Bob, spitting on the ground, walked away. Well, it looks like we got a preacher here in our hands. I always swore I'd never go to sleep on Christmas Eve. I wanted to hear the prancing of little hooves up on the roof and be right there at the foot of the chimney to shake hands with Santa Claus. And on this particular Christmas Eve, nothing, it seemed to me, would be easier than staying awake. My father's house had 3 floors and 7 rooms, several of them huge, especially the 3 leading to the patio garden, a parlor, a dining room, and a musical room for those who like to dance and play and deal cards. The 2 floors above were trimmed with lacy balconies whose dark green iron intricacies were delicately entwined with bougainvillea and rippling vines of scarlet spider orchids, a plant that resembles lizards flicking their red tongues. It was the kind of house best displayed by lacquer floors and some wicker here, some velvet there. It could have been mistaken for the house of a rich man. Rather, it was the place of a man with an appetite for elegance. To a poor but happy barefoot boy from Alabama, it was a mystery how he managed to satisfy that desire. But it was no mystery to my mother, who, having graduated from college, was putting her magnolia delights to full use while struggling to find in New York a truly suitable fiancé who could afford Sutton Place apartments and sable coats. Now, my father's resources were familiar to her, though she never mentioned the matter until many years later, long after she had acquired ropes of pearls to glisten around her sable-wrapped throat. She had come to visit me in a snobbish New England boarding school where my tuition was paid for by her rich and generous husband, when something I said tossed her into a rage, and she shouted, "You don't know how he lives so well? Charters yachts and cruises the Greek islands. It's his wives. Think of the whole string of them, all widows, all rich, very rich, and all much older than he. Too old for any sane young man to marry. That's why you're his only child. And that's why I'll never have another child. I was too young to have any babies, but he was a beast. He wrecked me. He ruined me." all the while she talked, and I tried not to listen because telling me my birth had destroyed her, she was destroying me. But these tunes rang through my head, or tunes like them. Just a gigolo, moon over Miami. This is my first affair, so please be kind. Hey, mister, can you spare a dime? Just a gigolo, over and over. These songs helped me not to hear her, and they reminded me of the strange haunting party my father had given in New Orleans that Christmas Eve. The patio was filled with candles, and so were the 3 rooms leading off of it. Most of the guests were gathered in the parlor where a subdued fire in the fireplace made the Christmas tree glitter, but many others were dancing in the music room and the patio to music from a wind-up Victrola. After I had been introduced to the guests, and much had been made of it, I had been sent upstairs. From the terrace outside my French shuttered bedroom door, I could watch all the parties to see the couples dancing. I watched my father waltz a graceful lady around the pool that surrounded the mermaid fountain. She was graceful and dressed in a wispy silver dress that shimmered in the candlelight. But she was old, at least 10 years older than my father, who was then 35. I suddenly realized my father was the youngest person at this party, by far. None of the ladies, charming as they were any younger than the willowy waltzer in the floating silver dress. It was the same with the men. So many of them were smoking sweet-smelling Havana cigars. More than half of them were old enough to be my father's father. Then I saw something that made me blink. My father and his agile partner had danced themselves into a niche shadowed by scarlet spider orchids, and they were embracing, kissing. I was so startled. I was so irate. I ran into my bedroom, jumped into bed, and pulled the covers over my head. What would my nice-looking young father want with an old woman like that? And why didn't he tell all these people downstairs to go home so Santa Claus could come? I lay awake for hours listening to them leave, and when my father said goodbye for the last time, I heard him climb the stairs, open my door to peek at me, but I pretended to be asleep. Several things occurred that kept me awake the whole night. First, the footfalls, the noise of my father running up and down the stairs, breathing heavily. I had to see what he was up to, so I hid on the balcony among the bougainvillea. From there, I had a complete view of the parlor and the Christmas tree and the fireplace, where a fire still palely burned. Moreover, I could see my father. He was crawling around under the tree, arranging a pyramid of packages. Wrapped in purple paper and red and gold and white and blue, they rustled as he moved them about. I felt dizzy, for what I saw forced me to reconsider everything. If these were presents intended for me, then obviously they had not been ordered by the Lord and delivered by Santa Claus. No, they were gifts bought and wrapped by my father, which meant that my rotten little cousin Billy Bob and the other kids like him weren't lying when they taunted me and told me there was no Santa Claus. The worst thought was, had Sook known the truth and lied to me? No, Sook would never lie to me. She believed. It was just that, well, though she was 60-something, in some ways she was at least as much of a child as I am. I watched until my father had finished his chores and blown out the few candles that still burned. I waited until I was sure he was in bed and sound asleep, and then I crept downstairs to the parlor, which still reeked of gardenias and Havana cigars. I sat there thinking, now I'll have to be the one to tell Sook the truth. An anger, a weird malice was spiraling inside me. It was not directed towards my father, though he became its victim. When the dawn came, I examined the tags attached to each of the packages. They all said, for Buddy, all but one, which said for Evangeline. Evangeline was an elderly colored woman who drank Coca-Cola all day long and weighed about 300 pounds. She was my father's housekeeper and also mothered him. I decided to open the packages. It was Christmas morning. I was awake, so why not? I won't bother to describe what was inside them, just shirts and sweaters and dull stuff like that. The only thing I appreciated was a quite snazzy cap pistol. Somehow I got the idea it would be fun to waken my father by firing it, so I did. Bang, bang, bang! Buddy, what the hell do you think you're doing? Bang, 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 stop that. I laughed. Look, Daddy, look at all the wonderful things Santa Claus brought me. Calm now, he walked into the parlor and he hugged me. You like what Santa Claus brought you? I smiled at him. He smiled at me. There was a tender, lingering moment, shattered when I said, yes, but what are you going to give me, Daddy? His smile evaporated. His eyes narrowed suspiciously. You could see that he thought I was pulling some kind of stunt. But then he blushed as though he was ashamed to be thinking what he was thinking. He patted my head and coughed and said, well, I thought I'd wait and let you pick out something you wanted. Is there anything particular you want? I reminded him of the airplane we'd seen in the Toy Story on Canal Street. His face sagged. Oh yeah, he remembered the airplane and how expensive it was. Nevertheless, the next day I was sitting in that airplane dreaming I was zooming toward heaven while my father wrote out a check to a very happy salesman. There had been some argument about shipping the plane to Alabama, but I was adamant. I insisted that it should go with me on the bus that I was taking 2:00 that afternoon. The salesman settled it by calling the bus company, who said they could handle the matter easily. But I wasn't free of New Orleans yet. The problem was a large silver flask of moonshine. Maybe it was because of my departure, but anyway, my father had been swilling it all day, and on the way to the bus station, he scared me by grabbing my wrist and harshly whispering, I'm not going to let you go. I can't let you go back to that crazy family and that crazy old house. Look what they've done to you. Boy 6, almost 7, talking about Santa Claus. It's all their fault. Those sour old spinsters with their Bibles and their knitting needles, those drunken uncles. Listen to me, buddy. There is no God. There is no Santa Claus. He was squeezing my wrist so hard that it ached. Sometimes, oh God, I think your mother and I, the both of us, we ought to kill ourselves for letting this happen. He never killed himself, but my mother did. She walked down the Second Road 30 years ago. Kiss me. Please, kiss me, buddy. Kiss me. Tell your daddy that you love him. But I couldn't speak. I was terrified I was going to miss my bus, and I was worried about my plane, which was strapped to the top of the bus. Say it. I love you. Say it, please, buddy. Say it. It was lucky for me that our taxi driver was a good-hearted man, because if it hadn't been for his help with the help of some efficient porters and a friendly policeman, I don't know what would have happened when we reached the station. My father was so wobbly he could hardly walk, but the policeman talked to him, quieted him down, helped him to stand upright, and the taxi man promised to take him home safely. But my father would not leave until he had seen the porters put me on the bus. Once I was on the bus, I crouched in the seat and I shut my eyes. I felt the strangest pain. A crushing pain that hurt everywhere. I thought maybe I'll take off those heavy city shoes, those crucifying monsters, the agony would ease. So I took them off, but the mysterious pain did not leave me. In a way, it never has, never will. 12 hours later, I was home in bed. The room was dark. Sook was sitting behind me, rocking in a chair, a sound as soothing as ocean waves. I tried to tell her everything that had happened and only stopped when I was hoarse as a howling dog. She stroked her fingers through my hair and said, of course there's a Santa Claus. It's just that no single somebody could do all he has to do. So the Lord has spread the task among us all. That's why everybody's Santa Claus, buddy. I am, you are, even your cousin Billy Bob. Now go to sleep. Count the stars. Think of the quietest thing. Like snow. I'm sorry you didn't get to see any, but now snow is falling through the stars. Stars sparkled. Snow whirled inside my head. The last thing I remembered was the peaceful voice of the Lord telling me something I must do. And the next day, I did it. I went with Sook to the post office and I bought a penny postcard. That same postcard exists today. It was found in my father's safety deposit box when he died last year. Here is what I had written him. Hello, Pop. Hope you're well. I am, and I'm learning to pedal my plane so fast I will soon be in the sky. So keep your eyes open. And yes, I love you, buddy. Merry Christmas.
And from the American South, we're going to travel to Wales for our very varied Christmas. And this is only a part of A Child's Christmas in Wales by Dylan Thomas, but I hope it will inspire you to read the whole thing. Dylan Thomas. One Christmas was so much like another in those years around the Seatown corner, now and out of all sound except the distant speaking of voices I sometimes hear a moment before sleep, that I can never remember whether it snowed for 6 days and 6 nights when I was 12, or whether it snowed for 12 days and 12 nights when I was 6. All the Christmases roll down toward the two-tongued sea like a cold and headlong moon bundling down the sky that was our street. And they stop at the rim of the ice-edged, fish-freezing waves, and I plunge my hands into the snow and bring out whatever I can find. In goes my hand into that wool-white, bell-tongued ball of holidays resting at the rim of the carol-singing sea, and out come Mrs. Prothero and the firemen. It was on the afternoon of the day of Christmas Eve, and I was in Mrs. Prothero's garden waiting for cats with her son Jim. It was snowing. It was always snowing at Christmas. December in my memory was white as Lapland, though there were no reindeers, but there were cats. Patient, cold, and callous, our hands wrapped in socks, we waited to snowball the cats. Sleek and long as jaguars and horrible whiskered, spitting and snarling, they would slink and sidle over the white back garden walls, and the lynx-eyed hunters, Jim and I, fur-capped and moccasined travelers from Hudson Bay off Mumbles Road, would hurl our deadly snowballs at the green of their eyes. The wise cats never appeared. We were so still, Eskimo-footed Arctic marksmen in the muffling silence of the eternal snows, eternal ever since Wednesday, that we never heard Mrs. Prothero's first cry from her igloo at the bottom of the garden. Or if we heard it at all, it was, to us, like the far-off challenge of our enemy and prey, the neighbor's polar cat. But soon the voice grew louder. "Fire!" cried Mrs. Prothero, and she beat the dinner gong. And we ran down the garden with the snowballs in our arms toward the house, and smoke, indeed, which was pouring out of the dining room, and the gong was bombilating, and Mrs. Prothero was announcing ruin like a town crier in Pompeii. This was better than all the cats in Wales standing on the wall in a row. We bounded into the house, laden with snowballs, and stopped at the open door of the smoke-filled room. Something was burning, all right. Perhaps it was Mr. Prothero, who always slept there after midday dinner with a newspaper over his face. But he was standing in the middle of the room saying, "A fine Christmas," and smacking up the smoke with a slipper. "Call the fire brigade," cried Mrs. Prothero as she beat the gong. "They won't be there," said Mr. Prothero. "It's Christmas." There was no fire to be seen, only clouds of smoke, and Mr. Prothero standing in the middle of them, waving his slipper as though he were conducting. "Do something," he said. And we threw all of our snowballs into the smoke. I think we missed Mr. Prothero and ran out of the house to the telephone box. "Let's call the police as well," Jim said, "and the ambulance, and Ernie Jenkins. He likes fires." But we only called the fire brigade, and soon the fire engine came, and 3 tall men in helmets brought a horse into the house and a hose into the house, and Mr. Prothero got out just in time before they turned it on. Nobody could have had a noisier Christmas Eve. And when the firemen turned off the hose and were standing in the wet, smoky room, Jim's aunt, Mrs. Prothero came downstairs and peered in at them, and Jim and I waited very quietly to hear what she would say to them. She said the right thing, always. She looked at the three tall firemen in their shining helmets, standing among the smoke and cinders and dissolving snowballs, and she said, "Would you like anything to read?" Years and years ago, when I was a boy, when there were wolves in Wales and birds the color of red flannel petticoats whisked past the harp-shaped hills, when we sang and wallowed all night and day in caves that smelled like Sunday afternoons in dampened front farmhouse parlors, and we chased with the jawbones of deacons, the English and the bears, before the motor car, before the wheel, before the Duchess-faced horse, when we rode the daft and happy hills barebank, it snowed and it snowed. But here a small boy says, "It snowed last year too. I made a snowman and my brother knocked it down and I knocked my brother down and then we had tea." But that was not the same snow. I say, our snow was not only shaken from whitewashed buckets down the sky, it came shawling out of the ground and swam and drifted out of the arms and hands and bodies of the trees. Snow grew overnight on the roofs of the houses like a pure and grandfather moss. Minutely white-ivied the walls and settled on the postman, opening the gate like a dumb, numb thunderstorm of white, torn Christmas cards. And I remember that we went singing carols once when there wasn't the shaving of a moon to light the flying streets. At the end of a long road was a drive that led to a large house, and we stumbled up the darkness of the drive that night, each one of us afraid, each one holding a stone in his hand in case, and all of us too brave to say a word. The wind through the trees made noises as of old and unpleasant and maybe web-footed men wheezing in caves. We reached the black bulk of the house. "What shall we give them? Hark the herald?" "No," Jack said. "Good King Wenceslas, I'll count three." Seemingly 1, 2, 3, and we began to sing, our voices high and seemingly distant in the snow-felted darkness round the house that was occupied by nobody we knew. We stood close together near the dark door. "Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen." And then a small, dry voice, like the voice of someone who has not spoken for a long time, joined our singing, a small, dry, eggshell voice from the other side of the door, a small, dry voice through the keyhole. And when we stopped running, we were outside our house. The front room was lovely. Balloons floated under the hot water bottle, gulping gas. Everything was good again and shone over the town. "Perhaps it was a ghost," Jim said. "Perhaps it was the trolls," Dan said, who was always reading. "Let's go in and see if there's any jelly left," Jack said, and we did that. Always on Christmas night, there was music. An uncle played the fiddle, a cousin sang Cherry Ripe, and another uncle sang Drake's Drum, and it was very warm in the little house. Auntie Hannah, who had got on to the parsnip wine, sang a song about bleeding hearts and death, and then another in which she said her heart was like a bird's nest, and then everybody laughed again, and then I went to bed. Looking through my bedroom window, out into the moonlight and the unending smoke-colored snow, I could see the lights in the windows of all the other houses on our hill and hear the music rising from them up the long, steadily falling night. I turned the gas down. I got into bed. I said some words to the close and holy darkness, and then I slept. Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night from Literature Out Loud. next month we'll be looking forward to a new year, thank heaven, and to a fresh new author, Hannah Tinty, who will be read for us by Meredith Daniel and Nina Gabbianelli. You should come and see it. Thank you, Mikey. Thank you, Bethy. Thank you, as always, Sean. Merry Christmas to all. Well, good night.